think the country is doing everything wrong. Our elected leaders, if they wanted to destroy our economy, they've done everything correct. They couldn't have done it better if they planned it. And I don't think there's anybody in Washington, certainly there's nobody in the Senate, that understands the gravity of these problems and what needs to be done. I mean, people talk about, oh, we got to cut spending in the future. We can't cut spending in the future. We have to cut spending right now. The government is spending almost $4 trillion a year in the next fiscal year. $4 trillion. I mean, that's more than twice what we spent 10 years ago. Twice. And I remember, thinking the government was too big 10 years ago. It's twice the size. But the problem is the country can't afford it. The country is broke. Right? How can we afford a government that spends $4 trillion? That's our money. If you want to know why all the jobs are disappearing, it's because they're in Washington. The government is sucking all the capital out of the economy. Whatever money would have been needed to fund business expansion, that money's not there anymore. That money's going to the government. The government is borrowing $1.5 trillion a year to fund its current spending. But at the rate it's increasing its spending, it's going to go more next year and the year after that and the year after that. We don't have that kind of money. If you put it all in perspective, if you look at the size of the debt, the national debt now is almost $14 trillion. That's almost 100% of our GDP. It's about 90%. It's going to hit 100% next year. But that's just the funded debt. What about Fannie and Freddie debt, which is now part of the national debt? What about the unfunded liabilities and things like Medicare and Social Security? Social Security this year is now running on a cash flow negative basis. It's always been bankrupt on an actual basis. It has a $10 trillion unfunded liability. But up until this year, at least on a cash flow basis, it was positive. Now it's negative. The Social Security is spending more than it collects every year. So now the Social Security trust funds have to sell government bonds in competition with the Treasury. But what's going to happen when interest rates start to go up? How are we going to afford to make the interest payments? I mean, there's no way we can pay back the principal. That's impossible. There's no way American taxpayers could cough up enough money to retire the debt. All we can do is hope our creditors roll it over in perpetuity. But I don't think they're going to do that because we can't even service it. Right now, interest rates are really low, but they're not going to stay low. Rates are going to go up. They're going to go up dramatically. What happened, in 1980, in order to stop the dollar from collapsing, interest rates had to go to 20%. Well, what happens if they just go to 10%, half as high as they were in 1980? I think they're going to go higher than they were in 1980. But even if they just got to 10%, our national debt has a 3-year maturity on it. And we don't have long-term debt. People say that the debt is a problem for our kids. No, it's not a problem for our kids. It's a problem for us because the debt is due in the next 3 years. It's not due in 30 years. And if foreigners don't want to roll it over, we got to pay a higher rate of interest. Well, let's say the interest rate goes to 10%. What's 10% of $14 trillion? Well, that's $1.5 trillion a year in interest. Who earns the interest payments? China, Japan, Saudi Arabia. Can we afford to make those kind of interest payments to foreign creditors? Absolutely not. And what kind of economy would we have to tax if interest rates were 10%? How many people would have jobs? Where would the real estate market be? That is where we're headed. We're headed for a major financial explosion in this country because of the predicament we put ourselves in. And of course, we think we're going to print our way out of it. We think that we've got an ace in the hole because Ben Bernanke can print money if foreigners don't want to lend it to us. That's an even bigger crisis than default. Because if we end up doing that, we have runaway inflation. And runaway inflation means that everybody gets wiped out. Our savings are wiped out, our wages are wiped out, because prices start to run out of control. And that's when the country really is facing great danger, because what is the government going to do then? Are we going to have price controls? Probably. What's going to happen then? So there are a lot of problems coming unless somebody goes to Washington right now that actually understands the nature of the problem. That the problem isn't that capitalism doesn't work. It's that socialism doesn't work. It's that central government planning doesn't work. It's that when the government interferes with the market, it creates problems. And the more it interferes, the more problems it creates. They haven't figured this out. Right? They just passed this massive new healthcare entitlement to solve the healthcare problem. Well, healthcare is a problem because government made it a problem. Healthcare is so expensive because government rules and subsidies have drove up the price. Healthcare is so expensive because too many people use health insurance to pay for everyday medical expenses. But what does this bill do that the government just passed? It brings 30 million people, more people, into the health insurance system. What is that going to do? that's going to put even more upward pressure on prices. Because the minute you have health insurance, you don't care what anything costs. The minute somebody else is paying for it, you want it. That's the moral hazard of what the government has done. So rather than bringing health care costs down, all this bill is going to make sure they rise even faster. Insurance rates are going to increase even more rapidly now that we've passed this bill. Somebody has to go to Washington to understand that passing legislation is not going to solve problems. Repealing legislation will solve problems because the legislation is the problem. It is very easy to solve the healthcare problem, to solve the education problem. All these fixes involve removing the government subsidies and regulations that have distorted the free market and have caused prices to run out of control. And we have to understand that the financial crisis was bad, but we never would have had it not been for government intervention. And the fact is, the government tries to claim credit for solving the problem by bailing everybody out. But unfortunately, the unintended consequences of those bailouts is that now we're in worse shape than we were before. Now, we got economic data that came out this morning on personal income and spending. And everybody on Wall Street is happy because people spent more money this month. And it's I think the 6th month in a row where we spent more money. What they don't report is that the savings rate fell again. It's the lowest it's been since the financial crisis hit. The savings rate is now 3.1% and falling. How can anybody be excited about the fact that we went deeper into debt to buy more stuff? Right? We are in this mess as a nation because government policy made us spend more money than we have. Right? We inflated a real estate bubble and then we went on a shopping binge. We bought trillions of dollars worth of stuff that we couldn't afford. And now, what is the government trying to do? Get us to buy more stuff, even though we're already broke. The only way to save our economy is to do it by savings. We need to rebuild our industrial base. Americans need to stop spending. The government needs to stop spending. Government needs to cut spending. Right? We can't try to stimulate the economy by growing government. The only way to stimulate it is by shrinking government. And that means dramatic, across-the-board spending cuts right now. Not in the future. Today. In entitlements, in Medicare, and Social Security. We need to cut the number of federal employees on the payroll. And we need to reduce what we pay them. Because we can't afford these lavish packages. I learned recently that the average federal employee with benefits and cash earns twice what the average person in the private sector makes. We obviously can't afford to pay our employees this much money, especially when we're broke. You know, I read that I think almost 50% of American citizens now have less than $10,000 saved for their retirement, which means they're not going to retire at all. So how can we pay our civil servants so much money when we're already broke? So we have to cut back everywhere we can in the federal government. There are a lot of departments that we can just completely eliminate that we never needed in the first place, and we can abolish. Now, one of the things that I want to do if I get elected, and I'll take your questions on all the various issues, people talk about, hey, let's try to repeal the health care bill. We're not going to be able to repeal it, at least not with Barack Obama in the White House, because even if we can get the Congress to repeal it, he's not going to sign it, and we're not going to override his veto. The only way to stop health care and to stop this runaway government spending is to not allow the debt ceiling to be raised. And every time we get to the debt ceiling, everyone in Congress votes to increase it. Why? I mean, why not leave a real ceiling? What good is there to have a debt ceiling if every time you get to the ceiling, you just raise it? What I want to do if I get to the United States Senate is stop that from happening. I want to lead a filibuster. I want to get 40 other senators to understand the gravity of the situation and to draw a line in the sand and to say, it stops right now. The spending stops right now. And if we can stop the debt ceiling from being raised, that's it. They can't spend any more of our money. They have to cut. They have no choice. They can't raise taxes because they're not going to break that filibuster. Right? They have to pass a tax increase. So the only thing they can do, if we can just get 40 senators to stand firm, is cut. And they'll have to slash. Because right now the federal government is spending $1.60 for every dollar it collects in taxes. So the minute you tell them that they can't increase the debt, they have no choice. Right? They can't afford to implement the health care plan because they don't have the money. Then they're going to have to decide what their priorities are and what they want to cut because they can't fund it. And that is going to be the most important thing. Can I get other senators to do that? I hope so. I mean, I think I have the ability to explain things in terms that are so simple that I think even congressmen and senators will be able to understand. But I think I have a pretty good track record as far as making economic forecasts. I think that the people they're following right now have an equally abysmal track record. I can point out that people like Ben Bernanke or people like Timothy Geithner have never gotten anything right in their entire life.